So this is the Global Dialogue Lab. Our guest is Pi Villaraza, and I'm Elizabeth Diebold.
I'm Thomas Steininger.
And we're your hosts. And we're the way the Global Dialogue works is we're here together on Zoom, and the participants in the dialogue lab are right now have their cameras off, and so that we can begin a conversation, a dialogue with Pi about a question that he's holding and that he's bringing into our forum. And so we'll we'll speak for about another 45 minutes together. It's just the three of us to really set the context and open up this question. And then we will invite our the folks in the lab to join us for half an hour of open discussion with taking the conversation further. And then after about a half an hour, the lab participants will break out into breakout groups and engage in a question that's come out of our conversation that perhaps you can direct them on Pi. So that's the process. There are three parts to this, and the first part is with the three of us and the question that you're holding. And let me introduce you, though.
Please.
Yeah. Pi Villaraza is has had a quite extraordinary life, and is at the age of 25 he left a job in marketing and went on a spiritual journey, and which involved a live food fast primarily of coconuts that awakened a profound, subtle energy in his being that he calls inner dance, and does healing work with the inner dance methodology, which is now spread all over Southeast Asia and probably further. Pi is also the founder of the Maya Eco Village, and is part of the Vision Council for the Global Eco Village Network. And eco villages, I think, are a really fascinating experiment in creating the future, creating a world that is sustainable, where human beings relate to each other and to nature in deep and respectful ways. And Pi is also is also the CEO of a healing medical I can't remember the name of it. I'm blanking on the name of it.
It's a network of. It's basically a network of integrated medical practitioners. It's called the Self-Health Empowerment Movement, and it was co-founded with one of the most successful integrative doctors in the Philippines. So it gathers quite a lot of the integrative medical work in the Philippines, and starting to be beyond those shores as well.
I think integrative and innovative and culture changing are three words that really describe your work. You're really pushing boundaries, breaking boundaries in great ways to bring things together, to create new ecosystems of human beings together, and also in the natural world. And we learned of Pi's work through Angelo and Anina Herrera, who have worked with us in One World in Dialogue before, and we featured Pi's work in a recent issue of our magazine Evolve in Germany, and just feel that Pi, that you have a unique voice and one that it feels like you're a voice from the future, and in the best possible way, that where you're integrating deep things from the past, from traditions, from different modes of energy that have been really perfected in the East in ways that are very new to the West. And I think that the question that you're holding, which is about if the East and the West can come together in a new way, in a way that's not been seen before,
yes,
you stand in a perfect place to be able to open up that question, I think.
Thank you so much for that introduction. Yeah. Okay, so do I just begin and see where it goes?
Yeah, speak about speak for the next 10 minutes about the question and where it came from.
Sure.
How does it?
Sure.
How did that arise for you? And
okay.
Yeah, let's see.
Okay. Thank you. So, greetings from Thailand. I'm in an island called Koh Phangan right now, where I just finished a big course filled with people, which pretty much maybe puts me in quite a deep process in looking at this. Most of the attendees are actually Westerners. So, to give a little bit of background about my work, I work in expanded states of consciousness. This is something that came to me during my hermitage, where I would enter into domains and realms of mind and heart that are quite extraordinary. So my work has spread across the world. There are about 30 countries that are practicing this work, mostly. And it's interesting by way of how organic it spread across the planet. Thomas might understand some aspects of this because of how it leans a little bit towards philosophy in some ways. I might call it dream consciousness. Dream being something that bridges the unconscious and the conscious mind. So that when you look at a lot of the traditional work that happens in the East, it's what you might look at as what Ken Wilber calls states of consciousness. So when you look at meditation or yoga, as opposed to structures of consciousness that has streamed into the East through the education system that we're indoctrinated into, there is a lot of emergent, like activities, you might call them experiences or journeys that are happening around the world, whether it be people going back to tribal tribal ways, whether it be now people are doing shamanic drumming and ecstatic dances. You might have to go to places like Bali or go to places like certain places in Thailand where a lot of the West has been quite interested in the spiritual modalities. Maybe that arose after the psychedelic phenomena of the 60s and 70s. It's been an interesting journey for me to conduct this work in an emergent way where it's not really coming from a lineage. Some people might regard it as a shamanic tradition, or I basically have found a way to bring people deep into their psyche. You might have to look at some of the materials in the internet. There are some people who have written books about this. There are some people who have tried to document this in movie documentaries. There are people who have tried to write about this. It's hard to put into words, but I seem to have uncovered an aspect of brain and mind that accesses REM states while people are awake. And a lot of that began just through experience, where I would touch people and a healing would occur. I think what makes this compelling is the fact that there are communities in the United Kingdom or in Germany or all across Oceania, throughout the Middle East. And it's interesting that although it wasn't organized, there were no funds that were put into this, that how come something becomes viral in this way? Why is it spreading on its own? So it seems to already, just by that standard, provide a kind of bridging. And so for those people that I work with, especially in the professional fields or the academe, there has been a lot of innovation by way of understanding aspects of culture or aspects of mapping emotions. There are applications that have arisen from this work that seems in the beginning like a spiritual or healing modality that is being practiced in hospitals or is even practiced in some schools, whether that be in the Philippines or in other parts of the world. So yeah, you can see that I'm trying to box it in ways that the mind could understand without actually looking at the experience per se. Basically, maybe psychology normally looks at 3 different states of awareness, meaning REM states during sleep or non-REM sleep, or there might be wakeful states. There are numerous ways of understanding that there are ways of understanding the world that transcend, that are transcendent in nature, that go beyond. And some people might bring up psychotropic substances. I don't necessarily feel that that's the way, but that's maybe a common way people might look at going beyond normal consciousness. But dream states, the near-death experience, anything that might look at how mind transcends time as we know it, time perception as we know it. I felt that as I have been facilitating this for thousands of people, I've maybe trained and facilitated around 20,000 people in the last 10 years from around 60 nationalities. A lot of that is well documented, so people can look that up. There seemed to be a burning question in me in relation to how to ground this in ways that might find relevance not just in the spiritual or healing realms, but more or less in the world. What does this mean? Like, how does this affect poverty? How does this affect climate change? How does this affect sickness, cancer? What's a little bit clear in my part is because this energy emerged at a time of simplicity. It might look like there wasn't much happening in my hermitage where I lived alone for 2 years, mostly in a coconut diet. But a lot of my work in ecology is very much present because of my devotion and because I saw how much could happen when we go deep within ourselves, when we go inside ourselves and we take that very sacred time to look at what is there. Let me go back to the dream consciousness just to maybe give people a little bit more context in what I'm talking about. In the beginning, my mind just entered states, and I would touch people, and they would experience this. Angelo could attest to that because I met him very early at the time that this is being discovered. And in the beginning, people enjoyed it. There were numerous articles that came out on it. My question was, why is it happening? What makes this the curious thing that here is the body on its bring people into very deep visions. They would start to see things about their childhood. They would start to understand a lot of the things that are very difficult to look at. They would begin to perceive their pain, and they would begin to address that. How aspects of this in ways that people with cancer, people with there was a woman with glaucoma. You know, there's no medical cure for glaucoma, and in a matter of minutes, she regained like 20/20 vision. There seems to be something inside the mind and the brain that holds firm our belief systems in ways that we are resisting change. And there's something about understanding what dream actually is in ways that there's a thing that controls I'm losing some of my flow, just having come from a workshop. It's the prefrontal cortex, basically. When we, yes. Go ahead.
You're right now.
Am I losing you?
You're right now explaining your work. You're explaining,
okay, sorry.
Yeah, you're explaining your work and where it's come from and what it is that you're working with in human beings. How does that bring you to the question about the East and West minds and the potential for dialogue between East and West in a new way?
Let me jump into that. Let me skip from my work then. One of the greatest findings that we have uncovered in this work is that Asians work with intuition. We are basically very much group mind is one way to call it, where there's a sensitivity. So when you come to places like the Philippines, or when you talk to the Indonesians, for example, there's something in Asians that have a hard time to verbalize. And it's the work of Edward T. Hall, who spoke about high and low context cultures, where there is there's something very non-confrontational about the people in our region, which you might call the East, where we're very sensitive. So in high context cultures, for example, people have a tendency to take things very subjectively. And I guess maybe you might look at shame and guilt-based cultures as one way of looking at the divide. Asians are more commonly shame cultures. So when you talk to the Chinese, the Koreans, Japanese, and most Southeast Asia, we basically have we have no problem speaking within our cultural context, but when faced with the West, we tend to be a lot more introverted. And so this is something we map out in our work as something maybe more right-brained and something more embodied, which can be quite interesting, as science itself is supporting this in many ways through the cognitive sciences and so on and so forth. It seems like it's very important to bring in very direct experience. And maybe I guess that is why I bring up some aspects of our work, because we find that it's only when a lot of Asians aren't really looking at things in a literal way, but in let's bring up maybe the work of Walter Ong, who mapped out how it's literacy itself. He's a student of Marshall McLuhan, so this is media theory. Literacy basically is when we innovated the written word, and we lost our ability to pass on knowledge through oral tradition. Walter Ong called this primary orality, and we shifted into literacy, where we lost the magic of the ear or the heart, and we gave it up for the literality of the left brain. So for me, in our view here, Asians are so much more right brain oriented. And when you look at the effects of colonialism and the education systems that were instituted here, it didn't seem to respect how people pass on information. So I bring up this question because in our experience of finding that bridge, it doesn't actually make a difference now whether I speak about the global south, north, east, or west. When we marry perception, structures of consciousness, when we marry epistemology with the ontological east, the right brain east, the highly sensitive east that is deeply entrenched in spirituality, in tradition, it seems to create a greater way of understanding each other in both verbal and non-verbal ways. This especially is something that we have to acknowledge movement, that a lot of innovations in psychology is finding out that the brain and the mind connections, especially in the way that we are able to access space, that we are able to move our bodies in certain ways. And so when we see how my people are initiated into the world in very militaristic fashion, in very we sit down and we're told don't move, and we're told to access the world through mostly the written word, and mostly through ways that examinations, for example, kind of entrap the mind in certain ways, because it's guilt-based. It's pretty much rewards and punishment activates more of the left brain as opposed to the right brain. Bringing up dream consciousness, I wanted to speak about that because helping people to dream again, helping people to find creativity, not through conceptual means, but it needs to respect how to listen to a more regional way upon which we access information. So, for example, Asians are very sensitive to sound. We understand things through music. We understand things through sound, and we understand things through body expression. We're traditionally non-inhibited physically. Having brought this awareness back to people, we're seeing that people are actually able to understand Western concepts a lot more. But we are only able to do that, especially because for us, we have been organizing actual convergences in different parts of Asia and the world. It seems like when people from Europe or America are also able to experience what we have to offer, but especially in ways that don't misinterpret or misrepresent what is deeply entrenched here as heart and great sensitivity, they're able to also understand themselves in ways that are looking through our eyes. It's almost like we're not putting one over the other, but states of structures and structures of consciousness needs to happen in the same way. Yes.
If I may come in with a question here. It's very fascinating to hear you, because the two of us, we haven't met. Elizabeth spoke with you before, but I heard about your desire to really also connect what you call the East and the West. and you were describing your work. You're describing some parts of your work that you call inner dance, and you were describing also what you see as the Eastern mind, if I call it so. It's also very interesting that you come in with the fact of literacy and how a Western culture, you could say, is heavily based on literacy. Of course, this is to some degree also true for Eastern culture. It's in terms of Indian culture and Chinese culture, in their own way of literacy. Also, a particular Chinese literacy works differently because the system of writing is different. When you look, the Chinese writing system has a much deeper intuitive connotation to reality than Western writing has. The way we put a reality into language and writing is much more abstract in Western languages as it is particular in Chinese language. And you are saying, as far as I understand you, there's something that you call dream consciousness that is beyond and maybe also before conceptual consciousness, that in Asian Eastern cultures is alive in a way that Western cultivated people don't have access to easily anymore. And there needs to be a dialogue between the capacity of conceptualization, if I may call it this way, and the capacity, why not call it the capacity to dream?
The capacity to dream.
It seems that we are in a situation globally right now where many of the cultural difficulties, crises that we're in, are very much based on the development of Western culture.
You mean that Western culture has brought the world to crisis?
Has brought the world to crisis to a particular mindset that is not only bad. I'm not saying that basically Western individuation, Western capacity of conceptualization, of abstraction is a bad thing. As I have heard, you also don't think that way. But the point that you're making, something is missing. Something needs to be brought in dialogue here. And what you do, what your work is one attempt to do this. So I would like to hear what you think has to come together here right now. What is on a global scale, because what we're doing here also right now is something very interesting. We're having a face-to-face conversation on a global scale. I'm from Germany. Elizabeth is from America. Right now, we're sitting in the middle of Ohio. You're the Philippines. Our audience is spread over the globe from Australia to Europe, to North America, to Asia. We are a small group, but we come together in a face-to-face conversation, which is, by the way, very interesting because it's not literal. We're not meeting through written languages. Multimedia allows something that has been not accessible the last, let's say, 3,000 years in a way, because the last 3,000 years, you really want to make culture, you have to write something down.
Or be with each other.
Or be with each
physically.
other. But here, I've never seen you, but I have a strong, even you are on screen, I can see your eyes, I can see your smile. There's a transmission coming from you, although you're sitting far away on an island in the Philippines. So there's something
there.
There's something of the we're talking about that is now interesting now through technology coming back to us. We have to find ways how to integrate that. Do I understand you right? This is kind of your approach, and you think this is the dialogue that has to happen.
Yes, I totally agree with you, Thomas. To go further on Walter Ong's work, he proposed that technology actually brings back orality in certain ways. And he calls it secondary orality, where technology allows feedback, because you can't really speak to a book and you can't really store. So what we're seeing here is that as both East and West catch up with all of these innovations, digital technology is actually more right-brained in many ways, because maybe you compare the old ways of passing on music, maybe the cassette tape or the record player as a little bit more left brain or analog, and technology like a MacBook Pro or an iPhone is actually more right brain oriented, like more synchronic in awareness. So I agree with exactly what you're saying, and I love how this in fact seems to harken back and also anticipate that right brain awareness, digital awareness, is also spiritual in essence. That we are seeing how it stems from the same. That we appreciate how history has brought us to a time of complexity where integration could happen. Because for me, it's not actually just technology. For me, it's airplanes, where you go to many convergent places in Asia and people are dressing up in the same way. They're talking in the same language. We seem to come into a common languaging. It doesn't matter if they're from East Asia or from Europe. Everyone looks the same. Everyone even smells the same. So technology, I think, and the ability to also meet face to face, I think that this brings up a very poignant point, which is it is about ego, and it is about the boundaries. It is about what separates us, and finding ways to look at both traditional and emergent ways to surrender to each other, to open the heart. Dialogue has to use what we have now, and part of that is definitely technology. I like how you look at AI to be artificial intelligence, but what I love about I know the work that you've been doing, and I'm an admirer of what I've seen so far, not just with Evolve Magazine, but this global dialogue. For me, AI is authentic intelligence. It is to understand that the human body, the brain, the mind, the spirit is also machine-like in nature. It has its own way of having its own scaffolding. It has its own ways of having a design or a blueprint. And we can't deny that there are differences. And it's exciting to see how both technology and spiritual experiential modalities have these very similar ways of bringing people together. So I find technology to be dream consciousness in many ways too, because of the way we are able to converge meaning, to converge meaning. So yeah, I love, yeah.
I think it's I mean, to think about right now, right now here amongst us, right here, the quality of connection or our capacity to meet not at a consciousness level, not simply talk at each other, or not simply to use this as because these systems, I think it's interesting what you're saying, because part of what you're saying is these things that have been developed like technology are now open, open for consciousness in a new way. That they may have been created in the West for very instrumental reasons, with the aim of using and exploring and having and so forth. But they also can be used as a context, as a forum for this meeting in dialogue itself. And I think that is what we're excited about, which is can what you're saying, which is the sensitivity of the heart, sensitivity, the embodied sensitivity of us as human beings, can we meet through authentically, intuitively, intelligently through these windows that we're seeing through, and
yes,
and what is the potential for that? Is there it's interesting because for us, I think as Westerners, it requires it requires an expansion of the way that we typically perceive.
Yes.
It requires some of what you're speaking about.
Yes. I bring up maybe some words from David Bohm. David Bohm and his work that might converge what we're looking at in terms of technology and spirituality. He posited the dialogue has this way of slowing down this runaway train called the thinking process in ways that we're able to perceive from the meta, from a metacognitive level. This thing that is almost difficult to grasp. It's like trying to hold incense smoke. Dialogue, and that is amazing that he was conducting dialogue with Jiddu Krishnamurti. You have a Westerner holding space with an Indian philosopher and spiritual teacher. Understanding that we are conducting this now around the world, and in many ways, maybe it's not always slowing down the thinking process when you look at social media. The tools are available. But understanding that intuition isn't always going to want to be sourced from outside. It wants to go inwards. It wishes to internalize, especially when you look at the shame cultures of, oops, I think I lost you guys.
No, you're good.
Okay.
You're good.
Okay. We're really needing to internalize so much of this explosion of it. For me, it's not the age of information that we're looking at. For me, this technology looks at the age of connection. It's the age of connection. So with the greater complexity, there's a need to simplify things. And so the West has given us the technology. And from where we're coming from, there is a technology that is inbuilt in us. And we might call it consciousness, but even science is saying that this consciousness is embodied, and that it wishes to it's so hard to put into words, but you get the gist of what I'm saying, that technology doesn't always need to look at Steve Jobs' innovations or but technology is science and spirituality for me are the same thing. It's like I want to understand, I want to know. And
if I may come in, you said something very interesting. You said that science or technology gave us the connectivity, the potential to connect. But could it be that, let's call it the Eastern consciousness, gives us the connectedness, being able to connect? Because you said something which I wrote down. You talked about high and low context culture.
Yes.
And later on, you said in the end it comes down to ego. And I thought this was related because ego or ego consciousness or individual consciousness, to put it in a less loaded way, is self-consciousness, which in some way is decontextualized. I am aware of myself without context.
Yeah.
And the way you were describing Asian consciousness is the capacity to be aware of context. Even to a degree that that your individuation is not so much standing out. You are more aware of what you're part of than than the part that you are. So there is an advantage in individuation. I think individuation is a very powerful a capacity of consciousness to create responsibility and freedom. There's no responsibility and no freedom of choice without individuation. But individuation by itself is a form of separation. I versus not I.
And violence.
Yeah.
In that sense, there's something violent coming in. And the way I understand you is without putting individuation down, we, through our intuition, because intuition is always whole. Intuition is never about a part. Intuition is always about the whole of presence. If I intuit something, I can't exclude anything. Intuition is only one, always. That through intuition and also the dream work and the openness to being connected, we have to bring together these two capacities of holding ourselves as individuated people, our capacity to rationally approach the world, and be aware that we always are part of a context. We always contextualized. And this is, as you express yourself, maybe a left brain inside. And in that way, this dialogue has to go on. And we have to do it as we're doing it right now, because it's not just about understanding the theory of it. We have to come together in this as we're doing it. It's an intuitive realization that we have to have. So basically, it's not just a cognitive something that we have to get here. We have to relearn or learn again how we are one on this planet, being also individualized people.
Yes. I would invert that even in an interesting way, because we there's something very fascinating when you do start looking at high and low context cultures. So in Asia, individuation isn't a big deal. It's not a big thing. You know, people live with their parents until they're 40. So we call it group mind. It's exactly how Thomas describes it. We don't have a personality. They in fact call it a groupality. And we see how someone like Thomas sees this as a positive thing. And I would put a spin on that, where it is also a very great weakness on our part when we lack identity. And what you have there is actually something that we crave, as compared to when you look at how so many Easterners are interested in what we have. They're interested now in community. Everyone's speaking about connectedness in many ways. They a lot of Europeans and Americans, in fact, articulate yoga and meditation in such beautiful ways that requires logic, requires a way of also understanding context from more verbal means. I would speak to what Thomas said about context in the Asian perspective. Our context is more built in, meaning we take it for granted and we don't actually understand the big picture in the same way that Westerners understand the big picture. For us, the big picture here is more felt. It's more like we don't speak in terms of, let's say, we don't go into problem solving very much. It's because of the heightened sensitivity. So it might be interesting to look at that, where people who live in temperate climates, people who have winters, who need to save food, you know, the people who grew up where war was prevalent, as opposed to in the East, where in the Philippines, we're so tropical. So we didn't develop our prefrontal cortexes as much as we are working more on the mesolimbic emotional brain, where our context is more emotional. It's more energy based. So we don't so this is why when colonization came in and a lot of these Western systems, very fragmented educational systems, were introduced to us, it is very difficult for us to understand the big picture in the same way as the Westerners do. So I think it's very good that I, from the East, am able to articulate to you that you honor us by understanding that the context of community and seeing the world as one family, one village, is a very good thing indeed. But bringing up Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs, understanding self-actualization, there's something still that is being craved and being longed for that seems to need to balance out. We actually need to develop our left brains as the West needs to develop the right brains. Just to end that note, Abraham Maslow, though we look at the 5 hierarchies of needs that are being taught in universities, very few people know that before the time of his death, he wrote a book. And he stated that there is a hierarchy of need that some people might look for at a time in their life. It's only that maybe 2% of them will look for that. It's called self-transcendence. It's the transcendent self. It's the ability to go beyond actualization itself. So I feel that this is what the East has to offer. And a lot of it is almost a memory, because when you do look at China and India and how excited they are at having McDonald's and having Beverly Hills type mansions, it is in fact the West that recognizes what we need to also value inside ourselves. So context does have those 2 ways of meeting each other, of being,
it's you said something much earlier that and I think it relates to, or maybe it relates, or it's a counterpoint to what you're saying now, because I find it very interesting that what you're saying is that there's a longing for this development of the left brain in the East. I guess, do you think that is that a longing like a Maslow's hierarchy of needs, or is it something that is coming from outside, from the West, and all status symbols are Western, all that I want to be. I don't want to be. I want to be part of this new thing that is modernization. Is it coming from a place of depth of desire, or is it coming from just the marketplace in a sense? And I ask that because I found it very interesting. You said at the beginning, you said, "Wow, when we open Asian people to the inner dance, when that becomes alive and whole again, there's a wholeness that is achieved. The capacity to understand conceptual reasoning and concepts goes up. So I found that very, 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 very interesting, because that to me feels like there's a. So I guess how I would wonder if there's this longing to be individuated, but it's not coming necessarily. It's coming from the marketplace, but and eroding trust in the kind of depth and high context cultural perspective and so forth, because it's not seen as valuable. But once you ground people back in valuing a deeper aspect of themselves that they had pushed aside, even though they can't go beyond it in a certain way because it's who they are, that once there's a kind of reholification that then the desire and the capacity to blend, left and right, really emerges, and that's very interesting.
I'd simplify it to maybe one point that might look at this in an integrative way. It's fear. When you look at high context cultures in Asia, talking about how highly sensitive we are, we're unable to address very important issues in direct ways, the way maybe Germans are able to do it, Austrians, the Swiss are able to do it, because we live within chaos. It's the way of the feminine. It's the way of Shakti, of Kuan Yin, of the Holy Spirit, no matter, depending how you look at it, from which lens. It's very non-confrontational in many ways. It's like sweeping the dirt underneath the rug. When you have cultures like that, it's pretty much see no evil, hear no evil. But it's there. We know energetically, emotionally, it's there. So there's a lot of unspoken things that is now creating depressions, advancing cancer rates in so many ways, because there was a very inorganic introduction of so this is how I perceive the West.
Pi, an inorganic introduction of, and then you dropped off. You said there was an
okay. We can call it
yeah, that's what. Yeah.
Okay. Am I still there? I'm
yes.
not hearing sound. Sorry. Yeah. Okay. We can generalize it, which is a dangerous thing to do, but we could call it modernism. We could call it colonialism, which is what it is. And a lot of it just, we don't control the systems. We aren't seeing that our traditions have the upper ground, basically.
Right.
And so it's a very reactive environment at the moment, where there's a lack of creativity because of the disconnection. Like if intuitive beings are being forced by default to think logically without actually ever being asked the question, who are you? I mean, what is your passion? What has heart? What is the highest expression of love and light that might emerge from a single human being? Then this for me isn't so much a problem that I'm looking at, because there is something emerging in our region that seems to be catching up. So I am careful to say that this is a problematic. I feel that this is the ground that a lot of positive things could actually emerge from.
Absolutely.
So the convergence, the convergence is at play precisely because of those inorganic patriarchal ways that have been maybe perpetuated upon us without consent, without
No, I hear you that there is, and particularly catalyzed by your work and what you're bringing back or calling forth or reinvigorating, that there is a new convergence possible. There's the what is emergent is a convergence of east and west, if you want to put it that way.
Yes.
So,
I mean,
open up the conversation. Or is it too early?
I'd like to go a little bit further. Okay.
Good.
Keep going.
Keep going.
I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. Yes. So another interesting thing might be maybe in comparison with how institutions in the West and in the East have differences in rigidity and fluidity. Let's say understanding how emergences are happening all around the world. It's just that because we are traditionally more chaos oriented and we're more intuitive and more feminine, how innovations can actually take seed here. So talk about whole systems thinking, whole systems dialogue, or looking at how these principles and these insights could find more readier testing ground in terms of even what would the new hospital system be, or what would the new schooling system be. This is where I might bring up our work with the Global Eco-Village Network.
Mm-hmm.
And to correct it, I am only in the Vision Council of the Global Eco-Village Network in Asia and Oceania, not necessarily the whole world.
Okay.
The Eco-Village movement, I feel, is one of the grand bridges. It's primarily dream time. Like, what would New Earth look like if we looked at the new economics? What would the new hospital system look like? What would more participatory ways look like, you know, or new ways of growing food or eating food, or harvesting energy from the sun and from the wind. So that seems to be maybe the platform that we need to bring up in the long term, in the sustainable sense, because when you do look at communities like Findhorn in Scotland or Oroville in India, the question is, what is the eco-village model? And that might be localized in different areas. The conversation that we're holding in Asia is pretty much understanding that the eco-village is in fact built in. We're not seeing intentional communities arising in the East in the same way that you're seeing it all over Europe, the US, or Australia. It seems like we would rather understand the intentional community more as the tribal village. It's more of a returning rather than innovation into new technological systems that seems to be the norm in how community building is being seen in the West. So I don't know why I said that. It's because like maybe I missed a beat somewhere. But maybe that might be interesting. Yes.
Isn't it interesting because this again is a representation of what you're talking about, that the eco-village in the West comes more from an individuated, willful intention to build them. And it seems, as you were saying, it's new to me, that in Asia it works the other way around. They're already part of the environment and they grow organically out of them. And in that, again, you see the different roots of Western thought and Eastern thought, so to say.
Yeah, exactly. I love this point. And this might take a very symmetrical teamwork between both sides, where because right now with the age of modernism, there's this idea that everything I need is not inside me already. I need to source it from outside. And what Thomas is saying is that there is an intuition that says that when we come into simplicity, which is more intuitive in general, because we're talking about energy. I mean, money is energy, food is energy, but a lot of consumption happens because of low self-esteem and just being in the hamster wheel of working too much because you need to survive in a very harsh system. That's the eco-village for me is in fact rooted in sacred simplicity itself, understanding that we don't actually need to work too hard if we can just agree on a way of living that works with what is innate, tacit, and inbuilt. So yes, it's it is pretty much not non-individualized in many ways. Yes, it's it has to come from something that we take for granted, but we need to go back to.
Yeah, it's interesting because a lot of our work is exploring how do we create sacredness as the foundation of culture, and you're saying that there's a sacred simplicity that is the foundation of the eco-village in the East, and that's
yeah, exactly. Especially maybe when we look at the economic component, how we are experiencing the effects of the monetary system as something that brings in a lot of indebtedness, you know, like a sense of obligation. It's built into the money system. A necessary shift where we don't get rid of our innovations in technology, but it seems to be a matter of being able to give freely as we freely receive. Requires a certain linking of hands, a linking of common vision, and linking of but again, I would go into counterpoints with this, because Asians, though these are traditional values that have been here because of how media and how literacy has affected us so much, without our ability to contextualize this in the left brain, it actually is very hard for us to go back into what now is eating so much processed food. It's exposed to so much advertising. It's very difficult for us to return to our more traditional ways without our ability. The right brain looks at wholeness. We now need to understand how the parts come together. So what we need are very right-brained Westerners, because you have innate in you the left brain. But what we also need here are very left-brain Easterners who have their traditions and their spiritualities intact, to have the dialogues together, to be in the same space.
Yeah, I think that's a great point.
Transition point.
Yeah, to invite everybody who's here with us right now to turn your cameras on and join us in continuing the conversation together.
And if you're not able to turn your camera on, let us know in the chat, then we will turn the camera on from our side. So you can turn the camera on the lower left corner at the camera sign. If you're not able to turn it on, let us know through the chat and we will turn it on from our side. Great to see so many faces here. And this is an open forum, so whoever wants to jump in, please raise your hand, literally, or via the computer system, and I will unmute you from. You are muted here.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Hi, Pi.
Oh, hello.
Remember?
Yeah, I miss you.
We met a long time ago when Pi was still starting his journey. And I'm very touched that I'm seeing you now, not just as a co-Filipino, but as a brother in the universe. Wonderful. It's amazing. This whole dialogue has already started because we met in a place when he was just starting his journey. And then I brought my children, and now Angelo is also part here somewhere in the Philippines.
Yeah, he's here.
And we both met you, Elizabeth and Thomas, and all the other participants. Hello, everybody. I am very inspired by the conversation between the three of you, especially the part when Pi was talking to Thomas and saying about what is good about the Western culture. And Thomas and Elizabeth were telling Pi what is good about the Eastern culture. What a wonderful world. We can only talk to each other like this. I'd like to start with what Elizabeth was asking. If the longing for the left brain is really natural, or is it coming from the marketplace? I would say this longing probably is very much in Pi's consciousness, in mine, and in many Filipinos who have already realized that the left brain was imposed on us. But perhaps in many Asians, it's still a lot of confusion. But I would like to say that, in summary, what was most important that I got from that conversation of the three of you, I remember our speaker before in One World in Dialogue who spoke about prior unity. And that everything started as one. And I just felt when you were talking, this left and right brain, that in the beginning we were one brain. But it looks like humanity's brain got split into left and right, and we forgot that we're one brain. And it sounds very simple. Maybe a child doesn't have this. When the child is born, the brain, left and right, is still intact. But somehow in our cultures, only one brain is developed and the other brain is neglected. So I think what you mean by the longing for the left brain is the longing for us to develop our left brain in our context. As you were saying, Pi, that does not destroy the right brain. To still keep intact the gift that we have by having very natural right brain processes. But at the same time, for the Westerners to develop the right brain without saying the left brain is wrong. I think one problem with all the history of colonialism is now there's like a reverse that could be dangerous to say that only the Eastern view is correct, or the Eastern view is superior. You know, all this longing to go to all the temples, the spirituality in Bali, in Tibet, and in all that, in the Philippines, could become the reverse. That again, still the human brain will be split if we forget that really both brains are important. I think that's what Pi is trying to say, and the two of you are agreeing. I'd just like to say that, to add with this dialogue, we have to be aware that there's a history. And this history left all of us wounded. And we could wound each other more as we go along the dialogue. That is part of the reality of what we have now. That we're not operating on a vacuum. We're not starting from zero. Colonialism and wars and all this monetary system, the imposition of the literacy, cognitive development, has wounded not only the East, but also the West.
Right.
I would like to compare it with an image. I always like to talk in a metaphor. It's like a small tree, having grown all the time, believing that the only way to grow is to grow under the shadow of a big tree. So the East, the Philippines, for example, is a small tree, believing that we will forever be small. And we were small because we were living in the shadow. Of course, we will never grow tall because we never experienced the sun. And the big tree feeling its obligation is to protect the small tree with its shadow, with its shade. So I think if we want to dialogue as equals, we first have to go through this healing process that we really experience and feel being equal. Neither the small tree or the big tree. The small tree has to come out and experience the sun and not be afraid of the sun. Honestly, we're so afraid to be great. Pi is right. We have such low esteem. Well, the big tree also has a very low self-esteem that it feels the only way to be great is to take care of small trees, to give shadow, to give shade to the small trees, which is not the way to live. So it's very important for us who feel we are not equal, who feel we are inferior, to come out in the sun and enjoy the sun and have equal access to the sun. And experience also being sunburned, not to be afraid and not to be afraid to grow as tall, but we cannot grow equally tall. I also wanted to point that out.
Yeah, thank you.
We cannot be as tall as each other. We can only be as tall as we are meant to be, but we can still be equals. And the big tree would be nourished and would also benefit by looking at the small tree in the eye.
Right.
If we get out of your shadow and talk to you as equals, you will see, there's something in the eye of this little person that we can also get something from.
Great.
Typhoon Haiyan brought out the one great gift that we Filipinos have, and Asians as a whole, our capacity to deal with suffering. I think I was trying to talk about that, this ability to deal with chaos, this being sensitive, this being emotional. We call it compassion. We call it the group spirit, the community spirit. And I think with what's happening in the world now, we better come out quickly to bring this compassion into the world, because it's very much needed. However, I'd like to say that from my experience, what I also learned from the West, the sense of individuation, that we often say, you're right, it leads to separation, but it doesn't have to. What I learned from very strong concept of I in the West is the sense of boundaries, which we are very poor at. I was saying it as groupality. We don't know ourselves anymore. We are abused, and we abuse each other. The family system, the children never grow up. You know, we are under the wings of the mother until we're 60 or until we die.
Yeah.
And the mothers never discover themselves.
I just would like to give also Pi a chance to respond.
Yeah, okay.
And also some others a chance to come in. But thank you.
Sorry.
Yeah, thank you very much.
I just like to say that we are equal, but we need to really be, last thing is to be conscious of this left and right when we have dialogue. So maybe also non-words. I've been saying this in our global dialogue, to not only use words, but also non-words. When we dialogue, you know, maybe to use more silence or to use more music. Anyway, thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you, Anina. I love that. So good to see you. Yeah, so do I respond or?
If you'd
like to, yes.
Sorry, I haven't been in this platform.
Yeah.
I think what she said, what Anina said, speaks for itself. There's already so much wisdom there, and she's just affirming some of the things that I spoke about. But what I love is that she brought up boundaries, and in fact, I think one of the biggest causes of conflict. We don't know boundaries, and in my own healing work, for example, when people walk into my space, as simple as speaking the words, it doesn't actually matter right now what people are thinking about you. And these might be cancer patients or people experiencing depression, and they would light up in their eyes and they would realize, I'm actually really worried about the group mind. So I think that's a very good point that she brings up, that you can see that I'm always honoring the other side, because that for me is the dialogue. And I think I spoke about most of the things I wanted to express, but that's something Anina brought up that needs to be added to the dialogue between the three of us, that more or less affirms and maybe even adds flavor to the current situation.
Good.
Someone else, please continue the conversation.
I can unmute you, Bernadette. 1 second. I can do it from here. So yeah, Bernadette, you're muted.
Sorry, just the little tree and the big tree. You know, I think as children, somebody said earlier about children, and they don't have a left or right brain. And I find in our society, it merges very much as a child, and then it does seem to split off depending on education. You know, the whole nature and nurture. But you know, that little tree and the big tree, you know, in our Western society, and I guess too in the East, you know, children are very under the thumb. And, you know, me as a parent, I think children have an enormous wisdom if they're given that space, but they're the little tree that the parent, we think we have to teach them. But, in fact, when you give children space, they're something else draws a beauty out in them when it's not suppressed. So, we talk right and left, but, I was also thinking like a friend of mine, very Western, she had cancer, lost all her hair, and her hat fell off one day when she was out shopping. And she said what she experienced was real shame and embarrassment. And I thought that is such a sort of a Western thing. It's how do I look and what do people think of me in that moment? What our individuality has really trained us well in. And it's not it doesn't help us because it doesn't allow us to enter that other side of the brain, that groubality. So, it's almost, what I see is that when I'm listening to this conversation, is this right and left. How do we merge it in ourselves first so we can merge it? Because the differences, it's just such a shame. It's one or the other because we have both. I think every nationality has both. Becoming aware.
Well, thank you, Bernd. But there's something with the big tree and small tree, and Anne and I spoke that, and you picked up on it also, that I really also want to bring in because I think it's very much also about the nature of dialogue. Just the awareness that we are not only tree, we are also forest. And just the capacity, again, seeing all of you here on screen, and of course, here am I, small tree, big tree, whatever, but there's a forest between us that we are together, and which is part of a bigger forest, which is part of a bigger forest, which is part of a bigger forest. And the human capacity to be aware of this. And there is as I understood Pi, there are two ways to be aware of this. There's an intuitive way of being aware of this, and there's also a conceptualized way of being aware of this. And both are helpful. There's some way where, that's again how I understood your understanding of the Eastern mind, that there is a high context awareness that is just coming from non-separation. And there's something very direct and powerful about this. And there's something about the power of holding this also in a conceptual way, which means also some understanding of this, which allows system thinking, which is very much a Western thing. And
or big picture.
Or big picture in the forms of understanding. And again, the question how to bring this together and how to see that we are not just big or small trees, but basically there's a huge forest called the universe. And it's us.
Pi, if you want to respond, feel free.
Yes, I do. Yes, so I think we are looking at a tertiary system that is not left and right. And I think that is the point that's coming across. Not necessarily mine, but just this conversation seems to be affirming that. Let me see. It's like I'm saying, with the advent of modern technology and with the advent of people really traveling and seeing each other eye to eye, we're embracing each other very, very deeply. We're almost having to map these out right now, so that in that transition point, letting go of that which doesn't serve us anymore, we don't actually know where this is going in many ways, because there are many things about the East that are appropriate to the East, and vice versa. But we're seeing ourselves faced with quantum physics and spiritual awakenings as all kinds of systems collapse, either politically or economically. So there is an emergent consciousness that probably won't look at East and West in the same way that we're speaking about it now. We might even go deeper into how we understand structures of consciousness as self and the other, the subject and the object. The like in linguistics, we look at writers who talked about the death of the author. That we're especially with the advent of modern technology, we're coming into sensitivity that it is Mikhail Bakhtin, the philosopher, who spoke about how it is impossible for us to write a single word without actually having been influenced by everything that's written before that, and does not anticipate everything that will be written afterwards. So I feel there's not enough attention being placed upon how is the mind and the brain already shifting with the advent of social media. I feel Facebook has probably changed the human brain more than any other innovation in the history of mankind, to be honest. Now that we're seeing individuation of people in Africa or Brazil or in small villages in the Philippines, I feel we're not paying attention to an emergent mind that is has an exponential growth that that doesn't look at north, south, east, and west. So a lot of these are very existent, but aren't talked about and aren't being mapped out because we still see differences. And I feel the ones who are conducting very direct experiential work in the East have a lot to contribute to what is being mapped out in the cognitive sciences and anthropological circles and psychological, psychoanalytic, like groups. I hope that adds a little bit to what was said prior.
Yeah, great.
Great.
I'd like to begin to transition into our. Does someone want to take this further? Is there
before we go into
go into groups? Yeah, Lloyd, go ahead.
Lloyd, go ahead. I unmute you, so you should be unmuted now.
Thank you. Something I've looked at, which I think is a contributing part of this, and it's related to the either-or mentality we have in the West. And a question I've looked at is, why in the West do we feel the need to eliminate that which we wish to go beyond? And some examples I can give are with the rising of Western science, we threw out the perennial wisdom. With the arising of Christianity, they burned the library at Alexandria and other texts that were in existence in the Middle East. And when the Christian missionaries came to the New World here, they insisted that the indigenous peoples give up their belief systems and only adopt theirs. And there's something absolutely anti-evolutionary about that approach. And I think that's an extreme stumbling block for us in the West. Any comments?
Yeah. Yes. I totally agree with this. For me, the library is, when you look at consciousness work as we experience it here, the library is also accessible through direct ways, meaning everything is known too. It's innate. It's just that it doesn't always understand how context changes depending on where you are at. So we've been looking at undevelopment as another way of development, where everything was okay before we started. And I feel this is what you are speaking from a more maybe epistemological point of view. Here we don't necessarily look at the diachronic unfoldment of history, because the ability to access consciousness is there. I mean, Albert Einstein himself said time does exist. And that's an affirmation of that what was then existent is still very much accessible now, maybe even more. So evolution doesn't look like evolution when we talk about development as it's happening now. So I don't know how to express it, but we don't seem to need to evolve so much as to just be, you know, just almost stand still and just be, and allow everything that's there to just catch up.
Great. Savannah,
can I jump in real quick?
Okay, we wanted to switch into groups because we're so that people can talk with each other. If
it's real quick, I think we still have a second.
Yeah, less than 30 seconds.
Okay.
Hi. I recommend.
Hi, Savannah.
I recommend you contact the My Life Institute. See if you can have a conversation with the Dalai Lama during his life conference twice a year to ask that question about mapping that out. I think they would find that very interesting. I'm done. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Savannah.
Thank you.
I'll note that. Yes, definitely.
Great. So we would like now to great to transition to the small groups, and these groups will be time-wise open. So we hope not to terminate them from our side as we did last time.
Well, actually, we need someone.
Into it.
Okay, good. So we're going to click something, and then you're going to get on your screen. It will invite you into a group, and you say yes, and you'll be put in a group with other people, and in order to continue the conversation. And Pi, I wondered if you had a particular question or angle that you would like people to continue to explore. Is there something that would be fruitful, you think? And this is where everyone jumps off the line and says, "I don't want to be part of this." But this is where the interesting stuff happens. Or it's not that it isn't interesting. All of it's interesting. It's where you really get a chance yourself to explore these questions.
It's particular possibility to really go beyond the listening parts to the dialogue part in this. So this kind of in fact, I find fun part of this whole one world and dialogue experience.
Okay. Can I give the question now?
Please.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. So something just emerged. I don't know if it can do it, but how can heart and mind find a meeting ground where East and West also find ground?
Okay. Now, do you want to say it again, Pi, so that some people are writing it down? How can heart and mind?
Okay. Find meeting ground in ways that East and West are also finding meeting ground.